Action must be prompt, otherwise CO2 producing infrastructure that may be built within a decade will make it impractical to keep further global warming under 1 degree Celsius. I refer especially to the large number of coal-fired power plants that China, the United States, and India are planning to build without CO2 sequestration.
Right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems. Dr. Utopia's sensational new discovery, ISM. Once you swallow the contents of this bottle, you'll have the bountiful benefit of higher wages, shorter hours, and security.
There seems to be a preponderance of evidence that suggests that if we continue with carbon dioxide loading of the atmosphere, leading to the release of methane, we understand recently.
Let's use logic.
All right.
Most of the warming, 5/10 since 1850, occurred before 1940. That was before the post-war industrial revolution that surrounded the world with human-emitted CO2.
When George Kennan, director of the U.S. Policy Planning Committee, published his now famous memo to that group outlining American post-war foreign policy. American foreign policy has moved forward unchanged since that time. Noam Chomsky speaks of this directive in the following interview.
Globalization is a fine thing. There should be international integration, but it should be to create a world which is sort of the opposite of what George Kennan was describing and what in your quote you read, and what is in fact the ideology of the World Trade Organization, which is not free markets and is a particular form of international integration in which the rights of investors are privileged and the rights of the general population are incidental.
And I read George Kennan's directive during the interview with Professor Thomas D. Zengatita. It is the policy the U.S. has employed ever since. George F. Kennan in 1948 wrote, "We have about 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6.3% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment. Our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which will permit us to maintain this position of disparity. To do so, we will have to dispense with sentimentality and daydreaming, and our attention will have to be concentrated everywhere on our immediate national objectives. We should cease to talk about vague and unreal objectives such as human rights."
You're going for the Macy's campaign. They put in a sale, you're going for the campaign. All right, you're putting your dollar is your vote. You're voting this corporation ahead of yourself.
The raising of living standards and democratization. The day is not far off when we are going to have to deal in straight power concepts. The less we are then hampered by idealistic slogans, the better. 1948 has our policy, in actual fact, in the United States, changed very much from that thinking?
No.
The market doesn't really care whether or not the citizens are educated and make good decisions as a result of their stewardship in the marketplace of ideas.
He illustrates just how the public opinions are shaped by media to support government policies and the country's direction, often against human survival, environmentally, and the best direction for humanity as a whole. Mainstream media has become Western propaganda, designed to shape the people's minds against their own best interests.
I don't think we're going to get, the global jolt that people need in order to wake up to this problem.
Hence, U.S. foreign policy has continued virtually unchanged since the end of World War II. The U.S. direction of the creation of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, agencies that support major international development, and failing states. Their practices often oppose sound environmental direction. For example, like the World Bank funding coal-fired plants, they vigorously support major multinational corporations and globalization of the economy. American economic policy is advanced through these organizations, with loans required by failing states being propped up by the failure of globalization and the international banking system in their country. Often the prerequisite for these loans is for social programs to be curtailed as a condition for loans, as in the case of Greece and Portugal. euphemistically called belt-tightening. The U.S. talks about freedom, but has supported since the 1950s most right-wing dictatorships or monarchies, like Saudi Arabia, against the rights of self-determination of its population. Citizens of the Western world are free to buy the goods stocked in most shopping malls, while the freedom to think differently or independently in terms of economic direction and continued military action is viewed as unpatriotic and against American interests. You will see that most of the important international thinkers do not agree with American foreign policy. The growing global consensus is that American foreign policy is inextricably linked to climate change. James Hansen, director of GISS at NASA, has been stating this repeatedly in the face of mounting global criticisms from people who are in denial and refuse to recognize that fundamental changes in economic direction are necessary if future generations are to survive. He has supported anti-coal and fossil fuel marches on Washington. The government's decision refusing to change direction has brought us to a world on edge.
To some old lethargic ice sheet models, real-world data imply substantial sea level change in centuries, not millennia.
It's one of the things that I don't perceive and is at the root of this problem of why Dr. Hansen is finding resistance to his message, not from the administration as much as from the public that doesn't seem to be paying much attention if you look at the poll data.
Before we even get to Lovelock's 500 million people living at the Arctic Circle, yes, don't you think people are going to have a lot of reasons to use their nukes to protect what dwindling resources they have? My biggest fear is there are countries with nuclear weapons that are going to have nothing to lose by using them to protect the dwindling resources that they have. You don't think India and Pakistan are going to go to war when India says, our people need this water, you can't have it, and they can divert that river?